The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, my group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone. I am geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont from HVERI, the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute. We are here today to give you a Hawaiian Volcano Tracker update. Today is Thursday, November 2nd, 2023. Kilauea is still quaking every few days here, so nothing has changed on the surface, but a few details to talk about underground. How are you today, Dane?
Oh, doing good. How about yourself?
Doing all right. It's been busy. We've been writing a lot of grants here.
Yeah.
We had the town hall last week that we streamed, so we had a short update then. So a lot of stuff going on, but we're not going to try to belabor it today. We'll try to just do our usual pace as we go through here.
It was cool for anybody that missed it. We were able to be part of the panel at the town hall with the fire department, civil defense, police department, as well as various county departments, and as well Vibrant Hawaii, which is our partner organization. So we were able to talk a little bit about digital resilience and the things that we do.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so HVERI, our Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute, our mission is to improve disaster preparedness through volcano education and network building. So that's the two parts of it right there. And this is what we're doing today, reaching out to you guys in our network and using Volcano Talk to build our community here. So all that said, let's get into it, Dane.
Yeah. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat, and we'll try and get to them at the end.
Thanks, Dane, for leading that discussion there. So let's flip our screen here, and let's share with you guys today's Hawaiian Volcano Summary. So this week's Hawaiian Volcano Summary, you see the pattern of earthquakes for the past week on Kilauea still remains extensive to the southwest of the summit, mostly outside the summit region here. And the rates of earthquakes have been varying over the last month. It's been about 1 month since this seismic ramp up began. And there have been several pulses. The USGS has identified 4 of them. 1, they skipped that second one, 2, 3, and 4 here. So we've just ended the most recent pulse of earthquakes last week, and now the levels are back down again. What's interesting about this is if you look at the Hilina Pali station, which is 7 miles southwest of the summit, you can see that it has been moving to the south at an accelerated rate over the past few weeks here. But just recently, it appears to be moving at an accelerated rate to the east as well. So it seems like some rapid changes are still happening fairly south of the summit region. And in combination with what we see at the Sand Hill Station, which is this tilt meter just outside the summit to the southwest, which has been picking up this inflation signal for all month. That's this green line. Every little rise is a pulse of inflation. This is where it goes offline. So pulse of inflation, and then it stabilizes. Here's another pulse coming in, another pulse coming in. And these correspond to those earthquakes cycles that we saw on the graph there. The most recent one here. And maybe you can see at the very right end of the graph now, both the component facing east of Sand Hill and southeast and northeast towards the summit are both deflating now. So what we're seeing is continued accelerated movement south of the volcano. And we're starting to see signs of a little bit of, it's hard to call it very major deflation, but it's certainly not inflating very strongly anymore. So that appears that the center of pressure has migrated to the south, and it remains to be seen what will happen next. We'll get into the possibilities in our full update. That's Kilauea. We can look at Mauna Loa. Mauna Loa has continued its pattern of deep earthquakes underneath the summit. They're coming slightly shallower, but all still deeper than about 13, 14 miles down, these blues and purples plotted on this map. This may have to do with Kilauea's southwest flank adjusting, which is adjacent to this part of Mauna Loa. There may be some connection there, but once again, we'll have to wait and see. This likely corresponds as well to that continually evolving magma supply system under Mauna Loa following the last eruption. So that pattern continues. The volcano in the shallower regions is still slowly swelling without any shallow earthquakes to be alarmed about. And volcano still remains at alert level, normal, and green. That's the Hawaiian Volcano Summary for this week. And with that, let's move over to our volcanic hazard summary. And we'll use the VOG measurement and prediction project from the University of Hawaii at Manoa once again. And the forecast here today looks as such. This is the next couple of days. The amount of gas coming out of the volcano is not super high. It's at a volcanic background of about 125 tons per day. But we've had some slack winds, low winds here in this area over the past few days, and that's allowed the VOG to collect in this volcano area. And there have been effects locally to volcano and southwest to Pahala, Naalehu a little bit as well. Otherwise, you expect the bigger impact to occur if there actually is an eruption when we have a much higher emission of gas, something like 10,000 times higher to what you see here. 1,000 to 10,000 times higher. So that's the VOG forecast, and we have monitors from Purple Air, and they are showing good conditions in the green island-wide. That's the volcanic hazard update there. Not a lot of hazard with a low gas unless you're sensitive and nearby, but worth covering always. So moving on to our recent earthquakes, which is a more extensive segment today. to share with you guys. So here's a map from the USGS that's just showing them plotted by time. So all these in the yellow are ones within the last day, and there's a few orange ones down here within the last hours here. This is hard to pull apart what's actually happening here. So as last week, I'll advance us to the USGS site where I can change the parameters and have it plot colored by depth. So now the reds are the shallows and the blues and purples are the deep. There are those deep earthquakes under Mauna Loa summit right there. Here are these blues and purples of deep earthquakes under Pahala. We have a band of shallow south flank earthquakes, but really it's this cluster of reddish earthquakes, the shallow part of Kilauea, that we're most concerned about right here. So let's see if I can get this zoomed in without crashing the computer here. All right, am I still here? Yep. All right, made it. So there they are. There's that pattern of earthquakes. You can see it shooting off from the south of Kilauea to the south-southwest there. There is a cluster of these sympathetic earthquakes on that fault zone that intersects the Upper East Rift connector. And more apparent now than before is scrolling southwest. There's a small cluster of shallow earthquakes over here, not far off the deep Pahala ones. And plotting them by depth allows us to pull these out and identify them more easily here. So we'll look at that here shortly as well. That's the pattern of earthquakes. And similarly, this map that we usually show you guys, plotted by the USGS, which shows many smaller events, also plots by depth. And so we can see here that same pattern of earthquakes, and there is that small cluster we just identified furthest southwest of the summit here. A few more ways to look at this. I thought I would make an animation. So this is an animation of the whole last month of earthquakes. And I try to blow it up so it'd show up on the screen here. You can see how these, let's see if I can zoom it out a little bit. And you're not seeing a whole lot on this East Rift connector. A few pop up here midway through the sequence. You see it seems to be flaring up in all three of these areas at the same time. Although really you get these upper closer ones to first. Then you get this one next. And finally you have these coming in here later on. And so progression of earthquakes is something like that, right? With a big gap right here that we can talk about shortly as well. So that's what the sequence actually looked like, animated. And now we have some different ways of looking at this. This is earthquake counts, the number of earthquakes, and this is time here in the bottom for the whole last month as well. So when this line is very steep, earthquakes are happening very fast in a short time. And when it's less steep, they're happening less slowly over that time. So the steep ramps are the pulses once again. There's a slowdown, second pulse, slowdown, third pulse, slowdown, fourth pulse, slowdown, fifth pulse. And there is the ones we identified earlier. You can see that most recently here at the top, we are in this slowdown phase right now. And so interesting to see that earthquakes have slowed down at the same time as we're starting to see lack of inflation at the summit. Continuing, using that same USGS site, we can pull a cross section of earthquakes. So here is a box that I drew to share you guys. A is in the southwest, B is in the northeast. And how this looks, there's southwest A and northeast B. Unfortunately, the website compresses these, it squishes them really together. But this does show you this pattern with depth and longitude here, this horizontal distance of how the earthquakes are distributed. So you see they're actually deep closest to the summit right there, that phase. That largest cluster is just offset to the west. And here's most of those earthquakes, some of them reaching fairly shallow there with that cluster. And the ones we're seeing now are here off to the southwest, are these ones. You can see they're quite a bit deeper. Nothing is reaching very shallow over there. And this is actually the expected pattern that we see. This earthquake zone goes something like that, deeper to the southwest. So everything falls in within a pattern that we've seen historically here as well. One more view of this is looking at that same depth, but now time along the bottom. So you can see by color, the orange are within the last day, the yellow are within the last week, and white is within the last month. So the current earthquakes in orange are not getting very shallow. You can see they're at least 2 miles down. And it's following after this phase of shallow events, right? That you can see has several pulses. When you see this gap right here, and then this vertical cluster, that's one of those pulses that comes through of extra seismicity after a time of quiet. So all different views of the earthquakes here, and the long and short of it is they appear to be slowing down. They're evolving in their pattern. We'll wait and see what more comes of this. But in the context of what we showed you guys before, this is a map of earthquakes on building up to May 1963's eruption. Well, not an eruption, it was an intrusion in that same area, the Kauai area. It would erupt nearby a few months later, but this was not that sequence. So here is a map, old school map, of where the earthquakes were in that situation. Right now, today, we're seeing this same pattern right through here to there, more or less, but we're missing all of this. And so this happens if the magma can make the turn along these cracks and work its way into this zone. So that was what happened in 63. That could still happen today in our eruption this year, or our intrusion this year, I should say. But we have not seen signs of that. So far, we can see it reaching, accumulating in this area over here, and it's still to be determined whether it comes this way or perhaps it maybe could go that way as well. And along those lines, if we look at the earthquakes from 1974, the December eruption of 74, there they are, that buildup zone. We saw similarly earthquakes where we see them now, but they actually had made that turn, continued off that direction, and went as far as the Pali way down there. So quite a bit further off, and not a whole lot happening apart from one event here in this intermediate zone. So where are we now? We're somewhere in between those two, right? What we're seeing on our earthquake map here is this crack, this fault line right here, seems to be where the magma is collecting, seemingly in this zone right in here. We've talked about how these cracks could cause movement further off to the east, such as over here. And there's a pretty clear delineation right there that it seems like this may connect as the same block of land to these earthquakes over here. Now remember, these are deeper and off to the side, so there's a lack of a whole lot of seismicity in between. So it's not very clear to me that it could be magma actually pushing its way all the way over there. But if it's wedging into this zone right here and widening this crack, then that could cause all the pressure. Remember, Mauna Loa is above here pushing down on this thing. So suddenly you open a crack a little bit, maybe that allows it to move as well, coordinated with this activity over here. And we will see that Mauna Loa actually has shown deflation at its summit recently, on its summit tilt, perhaps corroborating this sequence over here. So that's interesting. That's the earthquakes that we can share. And we'll move on now to our monitoring, and after that, our observations. So start off with you guys' report from today from the USGS HVO. Sometimes we go through all the daily updates. It's not worth it today. We'll just go through today's update. It catches everything pretty well. The long and short of it is not much has changed. Unrest continues to wax and wane with changes of input of magma into the area. They say the summit remains at a high level of inflation, and eruptions are possible in the coming weeks or months. No unusual activity along the East Rift Zone or Southwest Rift Zone. That's the standard header we've seen for a while now. And the details that are interesting is they note here these time cycles of earthquakes: October 4th through 6th, 16th through 18th, 21st to 23rd, and 26th through 30th. And I think they maybe omitted something in the 8th to 11th. You maybe could count that as another cycle, but they're not reporting it here. So that's all waxing and waning. So daily reports are on here. I'm going to keep moving down here and just point out something very minor that they added. They are noting that Wikahuna Summit Tilt Meter has measured minor deflation since early October 31st. Sandhill tilt meter has remained stable over the past 24 hours. We saw it looks like it might be deflating slightly as well. Inflation is still high. However, the rate of inflation in the region has diminished significantly since October 4th to 6th. And here's what they added just today, and more so over the last couple of days. Pretty minor addition there, but that's something they actually thought worthwhile to add in to change the update for this. So that's what we're talking about, that extra decrease in inflation almost deflating here across the summit region. Remember, last week we had 2 inflation centers, one at the summit and one to the southwest. It seems now that the summit one is leveling off and the southwest one maybe is moving even further southwest, if I had to speculate there. And we would really like to see some INSAR satellite data, but we don't have it processed and labeled for us to see here yet. So that is the update from the USGS that I'll highlight. Nothing else is really that different in there. We'll move on to our monitoring signals. Let's put them to the top here and show you guys the tilt meter for Kilauea's last week. It's not a huge scale here. We're only going plus 1.5 to minus 1.5 microradians, right? That's the angle of the ground, very small angle of the ground. And over the last week, our net has been down. So net deflation. We sometimes have these deflation-inflation cycles that make this a little tricky, but it seems like we're having those still superimposed upon a pattern that really, since the 31st, has been more steeply deflation there. That's really what we see. That's interesting. And correspondingly, that same deflation, we scroll the earthquake counts. That's when the earthquake counts drop at the same time. There had been over 150 earthquakes per day across all of Kilauea region, including depth, to now less than 100, and today less than 50 so far. Looking at the distribution with depth, there is depth, and the last week over here, here's the shallow earthquakes happening in full force, and here's a slowdown of the recent days. And what you see deeper is Pahala zone, adding to the numbers, but really not varying enough to change the counts. There is the map as we showed it to you guys at the top of the update for the last week. And now we'll go to the last month. So for the last month, you see 2 different patterns. We just highlighted deflation over the last few days like this. But you can see that net over the last month, we're still inflating. But maybe that breaks into a couple different phases. Phase 1, it's something like that. Second phase, and then finally coming down. Hard to say, but it seems to be different today than it was last week and a week before that. And that's the same story for the Sandhill tilt meter, which the component facing Halemaumau has been deflating for a while, a couple of weeks already. But the one facing southeast has been inflating every pulse of earthquakes, inflating. And the in-betweens has maybe deflated a little bit, stable. So it's in that same phase of deflating a little bit, maybe stable, but it certainly is not inflating anymore. And that's a change for how long it's lasted compared to what we've seen further back in the sequence here. Maybe in here, something similar where slightly elongated deflation came back on. So not to say it's over, it could still come back here, but interesting to note that the patterns are different here more recently. There is a whole last month of earthquakes, similarly depth and time. So you can catch more of these gaps in the pulses of earthquakes when they're compressed like this a little more easily. And putting all those also on the count map. There it is. That highest peak of earthquakes was the first 3 days, October 4th, 5th, and 6th. Here's that 8th through 11th that maybe they consider part of this back end. And there's the official 2nd, the official 3rd, and there's that 4th pulse we just saw. Our low gap right here may be equivalent to something like this. So it hasn't been long enough to discount that it'll come back. Looking at the last year of earthquakes, here we are. We actually, last week was the highest point for the year at close to 1,300 earthquakes per week. If we go back to the last 5 years and do earthquakes per month, in October, we actually exceeded 4,000 earthquakes on Kilauea, which is the highest count since the 2018 collapse over 5 years ago. So really you can see it's hardening, building up. It's able to quake more and more and more, even now without erupting, as it adjusts and finds space underground. So that's the earthquakes with the monitoring data. And the last thing to share here before we switch to our map is the GPS. So the Summit GPS that's only capturing crater rim to Uikahuna is only capturing that northern inflation source. And here you see the line is pretty close to flat, maybe inflating a little bit, but really it's the action and spreading has not been within the inner caldera, more so outside. So this is not capturing the full extent of what's happening, but it is accurately reflecting the caldera being not the source of the movement. At Pu'o'o, same pattern of contraction, nothing changed on the rift zone, and no reason for anyone to be alarmed down in the Lower East Rift. So to really dig into the GPS more, we need to turn to Google Earth here. So I just wanted to share with you guys where these stations are. We've looked at all the summit stations before. This is the Sand Hill tilt meter right here, and the outlet GPS station right here. The outlet is one of the ones that we've been looking at for, oh, what happened here? Oh, okay, back.
That's a new one.
The outlet's one of the ones we've been looking at for a while as the center of that action. So we have 3 components. If you haven't seen these in a while, these are now 2-year plots. And the outlet was moving very quickly to the east. That has slowed down quite a bit here recently. It was moving south, and was now moving north. It's happening slowly. And the up is one thing we were looking at closely as well. It was moving up quite quickly last week. It's still moving up, but it seems to be slowing down that rate of upward movement, and perhaps coming to a possible stop. We can't tell because it's too squished into the right end of this graph here what's really going on there with that station. But noting that it might be pausing there. This is a crater rim station, and let's just go to its up component, the most zoomed in version we have here. There it is, and similarly possibly stalled out here at the very end, and if anything going slower. That's the crater rim. And if we were to look at Uikahuna further north, there is its up component, not doing anything unusual, moving at a similar rate as before. And so not the center of effect there as well. So what's interesting is when you come to Ahua, which is right there, and we can see that it was moving to the east quite quickly, and it is still moving east, but less quickly. It's also moving south, but moving south less quickly. And its up component, let's look at the zoomed in one, also seems to be slowing down there. So in particular, the east, it was getting pushed east more and then less so now. So let's get this back. There it is. It was getting pushed to the east and less so. It makes sense if the inflation center was over here, it would be getting pushed to the east. If this moves off to the south, then it makes sense that the east component would dissipate, right? And likewise, all the up components here would wane as well. We can come to this station. This is Mauka Kipukanene. And here you can see its east component has really been going fast there. Its south component is also going. So it's basically going southeast and maybe a little bit more south than east. Well, hard to tell. Southeast pretty consistently there. The up component has too much scatter to really be useful here for this episode. So there it is, getting pushed to the east. And if we have earthquakes, these are the little dots are the earthquakes. This right here seems to be the zone where they collect right in here. And it would make sense then that this gets pushed to the east. So this is the largest still visible crack on a satellite image right there. The Pali, the big slope that runs down to the coastal plain, is over here. So between those two zones, there's a more solid block of land, we'll call it. And so as magma is collecting in this zone right here, it's also pushing to the south. And this station is the Hilina Pali station. And this is the one we've pointed out here on the south component. North-south component has been moving south very quickly here. Right? That south hasn't changed. But look at this. The south change happens right around in there in a timeline. And if I scroll now to the east component, you see that the east component is lagging behind. Right? So if this is true data with a caveat that the stuff at the very right end of the graph sometimes gets corrected for satellite orbits and that kind of thing, we'll see. But it appears right now that it's moving east extra fast. Still moving south. So it was moving south, mostly south, into the east, right? Southeast like that. And now it's moving extra south, maybe more like that. So maybe getting pushed further here. So the real question then is, how far has a magma able to work its way out of this earthquake zone right here? We talked about possibilities of it maybe entering Kauai. We would see earthquakes here, we don't. Possibility of it moving like 74 further south to the Pali, which we don't see that either. And we're kind of waiting to see what happens. But really seeing this station in the Pali, look how far it is from the summit there, 7 miles, being the one showing the most recent adjustments. So we really wish we had INSAR that covered this whole area all through there. And one thing that we don't have to worry about is trees, nice desert area. We should have good imagery from here. Will come out sooner or later. We just don't have it to share right now. And given a GPS, I would not be surprised if it shows the center of uplift migrating further south, perhaps as far as here as a center, and with effects possibly going out further afield. So that is the monitoring data for this week. And
Hey,
I
Phil,
would like
jump
to
in.
thank,
Jump in real quick and just thank Dano for providing American Sign Language interpretation for this update and all the efforts that he's put in. We appreciate that, but he is solo today, so put in a half hour. We appreciate that, and going to be bowing out at this point, but we'll be back in the future, and we look forward to that.
mahalo, Dano. We really appreciate you. Thanks for holding the ship steady today by yourself. Mahalo. Okay, so let's switch to our observations. All right, and let's see here. Let me get the right screen up. Doesn't want to show it. Let's see, back to, here we go. All right, so our observations. We have 2 webcams facing this area now. This was a little earlier today. Coming in foggy, but not a whole lot to see on a surface there. Looks pretty quiet. That's the MITD camera. There's also the S2 camera. There it is, looking pretty peaceful on Kilauea as well. Those are the observations here visually that we have this week. But there are some others that refer back to, we're going to step back now to the eruption that happened 2 months ago now in September 10th to 16th eruption. Because we had previously had a sequence of maps released. Here was the first map we had released on September 11th of that lava covering much of that inner crater floor, except not in the southwest, and also the downdrop block area. We had another map released on September 14th, which showed the retreat of the active lava to the zone closest to the downdrop block. And finally, we've had this last map released. It encapsulates the full eruption through the 16th of September. This was only released last week, a week ago today. We didn't have time to go into it in our full update or brief update before the town hall. But we actually have here the full map with events, and I always like to look at these numbers. Lava volume, 4.9 billion gallons, 18.6 million cubic meters. The thickness, maximum thickness, 66 feet or 20 meters. Right? We're talking about a 6 to 7 story building. And a lava extent of about 500 acres or 200 hectares there. So big numbers, hard to take them for what they are, and unless you remember what all the old numbers were. So to help us out, I've compiled this little graph here. And what I have here is eruptions from December 2020 to May 2021, September 2021, December 2022, January 23 to March 2023, June 7th and 19th, 23, and September 10th to 16th, 2023. So I'll talk through what each line actually means. Blue is a repose. How long since the last eruption? It was 83 days between September and June. The previous one was 92 days. See, before that, January was pretty short. And before that, some longer events. This one follows post-2018 collapse. So some of these numbers are a little skewed when it comes to that one. Red is duration in days. So I should point out that our scale here is a logarithmic scale. So this is 0.1, 1, 10, 100, just so you can see it all here. So that first eruption that followed the 2018 collapse was the longest, 871 days. The next one, 129. Then we had Mauna Loa interrupt this one. So this one, I almost considered a part 2, but it was only 16 days in between those two. And then between March and June, 92 days. And between June and September, 83 days. Right? So these two are looking pretty similar. The volume, that's the 18.6 I just mentioned, million cubic meters. How does that compare? 18.6 this most recent time. Prior to that, 15.9. Prior to that, 16.5. Prior to that, those two eruptions were longer, 112 and 41. So these last three, pretty similar in actual volume put out. Right? What's the difference? The difference is the duration in days. This one put out similar volume over 61 days. The one in June put out a similar volume over 12 days. And the one in September put out a similar volume over 6 days. So this green bar is the effusion rate, cubic meters per second. How fast did it come out? And what you see was way back following 2018, 3 cubic meters per second. Average over that whole eruption. For the second one, about 2.9, close to 3. The third one in January, that part 2 that I'm calling it, about 3.13. Right? Those all fit together. The ones that are different are June, where because we have the same volume and half the time there, we're like, what is that? 1/5 the time. We have a 5 times the eruption rate, 15 cubic meters per second on average. And now September, because we halved it once again, we're up to 35, 36 cubic meters per second averaged over that eruption, which is very high. And then thus corresponds to that really short timeline. That's the really interesting thing there. So there's a ratio, a couple of ratios you can have. How much volume compared to how long it had to recharge. Volume compared to repose, right? So I'm trying to capture here, is it building up for a long time before erupting, or is it something else happening, like some big pulse from below? Right, and so you're seeing here, because the repose is long, that you're seeing it volume per repose fairly small, and duration per repose has been the least here, the most recent 2 compared to the previous ones, right? So the pattern really is a lot shorter eruptions with a lot more lava coming out in that short time. That's the bottom line of what you can say. And this last eruption has done that more than the previous one, which did it more than the previous one. And that's the pattern we see. So that's the dive into the volumes there. And I thought we could show you guys, to wrap up here that eruption, the sequence of thermal images, September 11th, September 12th, September 14th. I'll do it again once it preloads. Looks like the browser is trying to save me some memory here. And the 15th. All right, so 11th, 12th, 13th, 15th. That same pattern of lava withdrawing. And one last thing to mention about that eruption, the USGS does have a new page on the recent eruption where they've now updated this. They have links to the updates, the videos, webcams, certain videos picked out on here as well. But they have a preliminary eruption chronology posted that goes in reverse order, Sunday, 17th, back to when the eruption begins on Sunday, September 10th. extra videos. So if you're curious about the details of this, then you can check out that page in USGS. And mahalo to Lua to Pineapples for pointing this out. So that is Kilauea. We will switch now to Mauna Loa and briefly talk about Mauna Loa. We'll start with the Mauna Loa update. Today is the first Thursday of the month. The USGS puts out Mauna Loa updates every month. That means today. So here we have Mauna Loa, still at alert level normal, aviation code green. The rate of earthquakes deeper than 13 kilometers, 8 miles beneath and southwest of Mauna Loa Summit Caldera was slightly elevated during the past month. Shallower seismicity remained stable. All earthquakes were of small magnitudes. Data from GPS indicate inflation as magma replenishes the summit reservoir system. That's it. There is not anything else to report there. Their update, the monthly update, includes all the other volcanoes, but all of them, Hualai, Haleakala, Mauna Kea, Kamaehua Kanaloa, formerly known as Loihi, all are showing no significant activity detected. So nothing else to say there. That's all the Hawaiian volcanoes. We can share Mauna Loa's further signals. Here's the last week in tilt. The daily variations you can ignore. It's basically slightly deflating there. Here is depth over the last week of time. So it's these purple and blue earthquakes are the ones that we've seen active over the last week here. Right? More so in the last couple of days, few days, last half of the week than the first couple of days of the week. Looking at the month period of time here, here's a recent deflationary trend with that little step we saw last week when this most recent swarm began on the 26th there. So maybe if that Kilauea's southwest flank is moving, Mauna Loa is moving as well. We'll examine that here shortly. And previous to that had been inflating, although also showed a little cycle of deflation at the beginning of the month when we had the beginning of this earthquake swarm too. So maybe there's something happening there. It's hard to tell with just our data, but we can point out the possibility at least. Depth versus the last month of time. So the first 2 weeks of the month, a few deep earthquakes in the area. It never stopped completely, but it certainly was a lot slower the first 2 weeks than the last 2 weeks here. And we pointed out last week how these events had been restricted to this 40-kilometer depth area, and last week now seem to be activating along a wider depth range from about 22 to 40 kilometers down, right? So that's about 13, 14 miles to 25 miles down. This whole zone right through here, which leads you to believe it might be the whole side of the volcano trying to move over there towards Kilauea. That's one possibility. Or it could be some interaction of the magma system as well there. So 1 month earthquake rates, earthquakes per day. Here is the most recent period of time. This week hitting almost 30 earthquakes on Mauna Loa. It's our record for the month. But you can see in the grand scheme of things for the last year, we were about to erupt a year ago on Mauna Loa. Earthquake rates were really high, and now they're really piddly in comparison. There is a slight increase right here, but we're not anywhere near the levels of what happens and build up to eruptions. The last 5 years, to make that point even further, really high rates of earthquakes per month. The last time we had this lower rate was, it looks like early 2019, right in there. 1 month hit that low. Otherwise, everything else has been higher for the last 5 years prior to this. So that is the Mauna Loa update. Here is that comparison of summit earthquakes in the month view to the week view, and those two cross sections side by side there. But that is Mauna Loa. I don't know if we actually got this to USGS has released a volcano watch yet today. There it is. Not just polka dots, the hidden dance of processing GPS data. So I have not seen this yet, but this is a Volcano Watch article this week. Let's get the right title on our screen here. For over 30 years, GPS measurements have been a key tool for USGS HVO. They come to depend on daily positions to monitor changes in the shape of volcanoes and understand magma storage and movement. So there is a nice image of a station, radio transmitter, solar panels, weatherproof box with the receiver and batteries, cables, fixed GPS mount, and antennas. And then you get the 3 components signals that we've been looking at extensively today. And they point out here different eruption onsets. Let's see what else they have to say. I won't read all the details here, but let's see here. This is installing the GPS station, using specialized software to record the signals, simultaneous measurements in 3 dimensions. For each dot on a daily GPS graph, a full 24 hours of data is used. There's more complexity to generate the precise antenna locations. You have to correct for factors that add uncertainty or noise. That's where the software comes in. So let's see here. They've been using NASA GPL to process GPS for the last 30 years or so. And calculates all those parameters that you'd like to know. The precision ends up being with errors less than ½ an inch, or about 1 centimeter there. This spring, here's what's interesting. HVO upgraded their GPS data processing software to the latest program suite. It's designed to be more precise, accurate, user-friendly, and flexible. And there are over 70 stations, a lot of raw data. And at the end of October, they did an annual survey visiting 20 sites across the volcano. So that's all the information that goes into those graphs we've been showing you guys. A lot of work in the back end for us to see one dot and then try to then do the fun part of interpreting all the data. And mahalo to the SGS for doing the not fun part of getting the concrete and antennas and batteries all out there. And something goes wrong and everyone screams online, like, it's not working, it's not working. Someone's got to fly out there and bring all the equipment and fix it on site. And all this work that goes on the back end is really a lot. There's a whole team of people that takes care of that. So having been in those rooms, I can appreciate them, and hopefully you guys can appreciate them as well through my sharing here. So that's Volcano Watch this week. One final note to share is our community corner here. And I'm just going to highlight the park conditions and alerts right now. They are still having Hilina Pali Road past the campground and Mauna Loa Road past Kipukapua'ulu closed due to elevated fire risk. Hikers and bikers are allowed. Related to the volcano and its unrest, Mauna Iki and Kau Desert footprint trails are still closed due to volcanic unrest. That's what we really need to know as far as closures in the park. And that is it, Dane. I can put up our donation page here and let you take over.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in today. We rely on viewers like you to help get this information out there. The likes, the subscriptions, the shares, those really do go a long way to helping that algorithm get a little bit more weighting, right? And we're trying to get this information out there. You could have the best information in the world, but if nobody sees it, hey, what are you going to do? But, that's where you guys come in. So thank you all. We appreciate everybody that tuned in today, especially during these quiet times or even like semi-quiet times, right? Where there's not an ongoing eruption that we're able to look at all these photos and things like that. And we're doing, charts and data and stuff like that. That's really where actually the preparation is, though, is in the calm times, because you do the preparation there, then later when it actually goes off, you're kind of know what to expect, we'll say. All right. Well,
yeah, I mean, really, like when it's quiet, there's a lot more guesswork involved. When it's coming out of the ground, everyone knows where it's coming out of the ground. It's right there. It's more interesting, but less certain, obviously, at these times. So I appreciate you guys joining us for that.
Right. So yeah, we do take donations, and these are tax deductible since we are a 501c3 nonprofit. You can make those on hvery.org/donate, or you can also do it through super chats. We're aware. So super chats you can make on YouTube, but yeah, those are primary ways that you can help us and support the programs in which we are trying to push forward and get adopted. All right, we do have some questions, Phil. Do you want to try and take some of those on? All right.
Sure, let's discuss some stuff.
All right. So Paul here asks, so let's imagine the magma is leaving the caldera again and moving southeast. Does that increase the chances it collapses again? And if so, does that mean it's going to be shot somewhere? And if so, where?
Okay, so I presume he meant to type southwest because that is the pattern of the earthquakes there to the southwest.
Right.
And yeah, let's imagine the magma is leaving the caldera and moving to the southwest. Does it increase the chance it collapses again? It certainly opens a possibility for that to happen. if the magma were to go further. So let's say that we do see earthquakes migrating further south all the way to that Hilina Pali area, all the way down here where we saw them in 60 or in 74. Then you say, okay, there's a lot more area all through here. The magma has found its place to go. Then will the summit collapse in response, right? And so that's why it's especially interesting to see not a major change in the deflation, but there is now a little deflation at the summit where there hasn't before. That's the first step towards that. So if that were to happen, and we see earthquakes moving further this way, and we see then increased deflation at the summit, that would be your sign that you're going to have some kind of collapse. Now, most collapses, eruptions we've seen historically are way, 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 way smaller than 2018. It's pretty common to have small little holes, little craters, little sagging, that kind of stuff is pretty common. Big collapses are very rare. So that's important to note as well, that by default, any collapse that we expect would not be a huge collapse unless you see a crack happening at very, very low elevation and you see the pipe open up, let's say through a big earthquake, and you see the rapid crashing of the summit as all the magma drains away. Then you'd be like, okay, yeah, now it's gonna be a big collapse because we can see it's all moving somewhere else. That's what we saw in 2018. All the pieces lining up. There's a lot of dominoes to still put in place for that to be the case here. But I won't exclude a small eruption further down and a smaller collapse in a summit potentially. Were that to happen, this is all within a national park and a desert, so there's no infrastructure out here. Some poor native plants might get it, and some invasive plants might get it as well there, but that's really the extent of what's out there in this zone. Right? So that's very little human impact if it were to erupt, apart from the big puff of gas it's going to let out that's going to blow all the way south to Kona and make everyone choke in the gas, and regardless of what comes out of the ground, if it comes out of the ground. So great question, Paul. And yeah, that's something to keep an eye on, and that's why I put out those two possibilities of earthquakes either here, or earthquakes either here, and the third option is neither. Maybe it's found enough space, and that's the end of that. Maybe we'll see the summit resume by next week. Its inflation in this southwest part wane. Only one way to tell. That's to wait and see. But I will finish by saying that this zone of the Kauai is known for having lots of intrusions. Eruptions are pretty rare here. There are a few. They're usually really short and quite often very small volume as well. It's just kind of like leaking out. Mostly it's not erupting. It's actually intruding. So that's my status quo, what to expect. And people are asking, do I expect it to erupt very soon? Like right now, I don't, because of this whole dynamic and the fact that it's found this space in here. I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again someday, with these things. But
of being wrong before, we, the last over-under date of October 27th passed, and I still remember a lot of people were on the underside on that one when we first put it out. So we put it out another one. This time, December 31st is the over-under date, just to try and get it inside the four eruptions within the calendar year thing. And right now, everybody's on the under bit. Not everybody, but it's pretty one-sided. 89% of 49 votes, 88% going towards that under on December 31st.
It could be, yeah. I mean, you can make the argument. If you look at the earthquake patterns, how many weeks of high earthquakes, we're about in the fifth week of it now. That's about the time it erupts the last couple of times. But I just, I'm suspicious of this whole Kauai fault zone suddenly being a more important player in this story. Right. And that just, brings all kinds of things into question. The ground's moving all the way over here.
Right. Yeah. Just on Paul's question, just the collapse idea. Like, I remember 2018, the idea of calling it a collapse, like when I'd be like, oh, that's a caldera collapse. Like the people, with backgrounds in it were like, I don't know if we can call it that yet. And then it was like, it's a partial collapse. It's not a full collapse. It's a partial collapse. So it's like it's very conservative usage of the word collapse.
Well, so you just said
what I've seen.
Yeah. What you just said is the way to say it, right? Partial caldera collapse, right? Mm-hmm. That means the whole caldera is collapsing. Whereas you can have a much smaller collapse within there. So collapse and caldera collapse, two different things. That's the key. Right. The key right there.
You also have the deflation events and stuff like that. But yeah. All right. We do have a couple super chats that came through. I want to acknowledge those real quick. We had Jewelry come through with a $2.99 super chat, and Scotch Ed with a $10 super chat. Appreciate the support there, guys. Move on to the next question. Dennis asks, how does the last eruption volume compare to Mauna Loa eruption in terms of eruption rate? I did pull little numbers if you want to try and I need to send you those.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't have it calculated, but yeah, feel free to send them to me. What I can tell you is Mauna Loa only lasted 2 weeks interrupting, and its volume was, I want to say, 10 times higher.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's what it comes out to. It's like 10 times higher.
10 times higher. Yeah.
And it was like somewhere around a quarter of a cubic kilometer from Mauna Loa in those 2 weeks.
Yeah, so 10 times the volume and about twice the time. So about 5 times the rate on Mauna Loa, or 1/5 the rate of Kilauea. So yeah, there's the answer.
Which is like normal. Like Mauna Loa is normally known as the voluminous one when it erupts, and that was what the big head scratcher was in 2018. Was okay that this isn't behaving like Kilauea, it's behaving more like Mauna Loa in terms of the volume of the flow coming out of it, and how you treat that.
Right. Yeah. Right. The 2018 eruption was Mauna Loa size flow. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Paul with a $10 super chat. Appreciate the support there, Paul. Milford asks, so the magma is under more and more pressure. Does that signal a violent eruption in the future?
Not necessarily. I mean, the ground is all cracked, and what it's doing now is what's normally the case. Magma under more and more pressure was what we saw at the beginning of 2018, where there was a lava lake at the summit overflowing. There was a path, the East Rift Zone was active all the way to Pu'o'o. It was also overflowing. There was lava going all the way down towards the ocean as well. It was leaking out everywhere, and it had been in that state for many years. So that allowed the south flank to move, to allow all that magma to drain out. And, in that sense, you might call that a violent eruption, right? As far as like how much lava came out of the ground down in Lower Puna. But once again, the word violent is something we need to just discuss a little bit, because in volcanology, you think of the more silica-rich volcanoes like St. Helens or Pinatubo or Krakatau being actually the violent ones, the pyroclastic flows and that kind of thing. And Kilauea very rarely has that kind of violence. It's violent, and it's on its Kilauea scale, 2018 was violent, but compared to the Grand Canyon volcanoes, that was not really that violent, right? Fairly slow moving. People were able to get out of the way mostly. So that's the difference there. To elaborate on the question, Kilauea has had eras where the volcano erupts more explosively, we'll call it, where there has been even pyroclastic base surge in the past. And the jury is still out exactly on why that happens. The 2018 story has helped us inform and revise the working theory here. We thought before, based on the 1924 sequence of events, that when you had magma coming into an area that had a lot of groundwater, the groundwater would flash to steam. That would create a pressure to create a big explosion. So it was more interaction of water and magma that create explosions here on Kilauea. That's what we thought for a long time. But following 2018 collapse, we saw water come back in the crater. We saw an eruption occur in late December 2020. There was not a big explosion in that case. So we've now revised the theory to talk about it depends on how fast the magma is coming up from below. Not just that it's coming up, but how fast is it coming. And when it's coming up fast enough, driven by a big slug of gas perhaps, then that's when you might have the most sudden, the most, for Hawaiian, violent eruption that you can have here, right? Where it may actually produce an ash column that's 10 kilometers high and starts dropping ash back to the ash flies west over Pahala, hits the jet stream, comes back over east and lands over in Hilo, and the whole South Planet Island gets covered in ash. So that's the my version of violent Kilauea there. And long and short, we're not exactly sure. That's the best working theory right now. But it doesn't seem to relate so much to the magma pressure. If magma is pressurizing there, then it's not coming up super fast. It's coming up at a regular rate and building up pressure in the shallows. So you expect a regular stretching of the ground, fissures, fountains, lava flows, that kind of thing, rather than explosions and ash clouds with this current situation. That's the best answer I can give, Milford. So appreciate the question. Good discussion for us to have for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that gets us through the questions. We are now over just an hour. So that, I think, will do it for me. Get off at a normal time for us. It's been a little while, huh?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Once again, I appreciate Dano for joining us for that first part of the stream here. Hopefully, we'll resume a full complement of ASL interpreters as soon as we can.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'd like to recommend if anybody wants to, continue the chat, stuff like that, the Two Pineapples 22.6 stream. The chat is usually going in there continuously.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, mahalo to Pineapples for their support. Lou's on the back end helping us out here. Thanks, Dane, for your work in the chat and questions as well.
Yeah, thank you.
And yeah, I don't have anything else today. We'll wait and see. And we'll catch up on some of the other things that we've been leaving for a few weeks here. Try to do that next week if we can here.
Yep.
So all that said, unless something happens to the surface here, we'll be back with you guys next week, Thursday, 5 p.m., our usual time. And until then, from HVery, he's Dane DuPont. I'm Philip Ong. Aloha, everybody.